Money Tree is the title of an article by Scott M. Peterson, whose voice you heard a couple of hours ago when he called, and we were talking about comedians and comedy and improv and Carol Burnett. The Money Tree, Scott Peterson wrote. Reuben Garrett Goldberg got his engineering degree from UC Berkeley in 1904. By 1915, he was earning the astronomical sum of $25,000 a year for his inventions, one of which was a voting machine. Goldberg died in 1970. But his idea lived on, earning fortunes both large and small for those who promoted something once thought absurd, the predictable voter. The money tree concept has been around for millennia. Mary the Jewess was the first known alchemist, plying her trade with inventions including the tribikos, the kirotakis, and the bain-marie. These contraptions weren't much more than moonshine makers with fancy names. She was reportedly able to turn ordinary root vegetables into 24-karat gold with her contraptions, for a price. Zosimos of Panopolis immortalized Mary in Gnostic Christian writings, which were passed down to countless scholars and financiers, all of them just itching to strike it rich, for a price. As the Middle Ages passed, so did alchemy. It was replaced by a new money tree, the perpetual motion machine. Suffice it to say, that gadget always existed as a proposal. All it needed were backers. Among the skeptics was an obscure naysayer named Leonardo da Vinci, who wrote, "O ye seekers after perpetual motion, how many vain chimeras have you pursued? Go and take your place with the alchemists." But what would a mere artist know? The idea wasn't debunked by scientists until 1915, when Emmy Noether's theorem identified it as an impossibility, which is precisely when Goldberg's inventing career began. That's the Rube Goldberg, by the way, just in case you didn't know. One problem with making voters predictable was identified by Edward L. Bernays in May of 1928. It was laid out in a publication titled Manipulating Public Opinion, the Why and the How. Bernays insisted it wasn't just limited to politics, but to industry and finance as well. Bernays was Sigmund Freud's nephew and used that association to establish himself as an intellectual, always managing to bring Uncle Sigmund into the conversation. Needless to say, all the financiers lapped it up, but 18 months later, the stock market crashed, gobbling up 89% of the country's wealth, something that Bernays never saw coming. Yet Goldberg was still making money hand over fist. The first voting machine required brass balls, literally brass balls. That was in 1838, where British voters dropped a small metal sphere into a clockworks for the candidate of their choice. This was followed in 1875 by a push-button machine that generated no paperwork. It was solved in the 1890s with an invention by John McTammany. His machine used punch cards, similar to what were used in player pianos. The first computerized voting system was introduced in 1965. That was called the Votomatic Punched Card System. By 1996, 37.3% of the United States voters were using computerized voting systems. By 2004, those systems were so darn foolproof that paperwork wasn't necessary, or so the voters were told. In April of 2016, a couple of Princeton students showed what complete bullshit that was. They did it all in a 5-minute YouTube video and claimed that an entire network of voting machines can be hacked the same way. All you need is private access to a single voting machine for 1 minute, and voila, you've got your very own money tree, at least until the next hacker comes along, which might be 5 minutes later. Robert Mercer anticipated that hiccup, so he took it a step further to hack actual voters, not just one or two, but millions of them. Starting in the United Kingdom with a 2016 referendum known as Brexit, Mercer is a billionaire that made his money running a secretive hedge fund called Renaissance Technologies. The jewel in that crown was called Medallion. It was a fund that reportedly hauled in 35% average annual yields between 1989 and 2015. Mercer didn't do that with stockbrokers. He did it with computer scientists and physicists, harvesting and processing billions upon billions of something known as data points. You've got a date of birth, that's a data point, and a specific income level, that's another. It's the same for publicly traded companies. They've got hundreds of data points each. Compare those data points year to year, and you've got a pretty good idea what's going to happen next. By 2014, Renaissance managed a portfolio valued at $25 billion, at least according to Mercer, whose net worth is around $400 million, according to Mercer. Mercer applied that model to voters, harvesting much of that information from social media. Every time somebody hits a like button on Facebook, they help Mercer with a data point. Different subjects register different data points. Mercer vacuums up to 5,000 data points per voter. With all that information, Mercer knows exactly how you're going to vote on each and every issue. He can even get you to change direction, at least according to Mercer. Brexit went swimmingly for Mercer, at least until UK authorities figured out what happened. Mercer is a United States citizen who donated that service to the Leave.eu campaign, didn't tell the UK Election Commission about it. Something prohibited under UK law. Nonetheless, he got hired by Ted Cruz to bolster his presidential campaign until it flopped, and he switched over to Donald J. Trump's campaign. The company Mercer used was Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica's secret weapon was psychographics, something that merges all those data points and then focuses them on voter vulnerabilities, not with accurate information, but with conspiracy theory whoppers, like, say, Seth Rich being murdered by the Clinton campaign, and Pizzagate. Remember that? That hogwash was amplified by bogus Facebook and Twitter accounts that registered fabricated likes and retweets reinforcing voter attitudes, and then whipped them into a frenzy like a good old-fashioned lynch mob, all according to Mercer. Smart money wasn't buying it. Right up to the eve of the 2016 election, odds makers showed that Trump was behind, way behind. The now famous Access Hollywood video, grab him by the pussy. I think that's what that one was, where he said he'd just grab him by the pussy and kiss him whether they liked it or not, because there was nothing they could do about it. That one undid any progress Mercer's psychographics might have made, so the heavy hitters were called in to dump Democratic National Committee emails on WikiLeaks an hour later, followed by Russian spear phishing on U.S. election software on the eve of the election. That wasn't overkill, not by a long shot. Mercer's psychographics just weren't working. After the election, Cambridge Analytica finally came clean. In March of 2017, the New York Times reported that CA never used psychographics on the Trump campaign. Why? Because it doesn't work anymore. Psychographics is like a trump card, no pun intended. It can't be played often. Brexit, as Mercer now realizes, was the very peak of psychographics. Now it seems to be marching backward, right over Robert Mercer, who, as a known associate of Nigel Farage, finds himself embroiled in an FBI investigation. A closer look at Mercer's hedge fund company reveals something equally disturbing. Medallion's 35% returns were offset by the lackluster performance of other funds in Renaissance portfolio. In 2015, it was reported that another fund, Renaissance Institutional Futures, had averaged a lousy 2.8% per year and was tanking. It performed so badly that Mercer had to close it down, suggesting that his firm may have been applying something other than mathematical formulas. Wall Street experts call the practice cherry picking, where an investment firm puts all the good trades into a closed fund to attract more investors, and then puts the rest into open funds that underperform. Medallion was, of course, a closed fund. One of the masters of that scheme was someone whose name you might recognize, Bernie Madoff, who got started before Bob Mercer did, using the same black box business model. Madoff's bubble burst at the inflated value of $65 million. Renaissance is now estimated at $55 million, and climbing at the same rate Madoff's was, according to Mercer. Something that wasn't lost on one analyst at Motley Fool, who wrote that Renaissance was either a Madoff-like Ponzi scheme or a simply amazing hedge fund. Bernie Madoff passed his money tree off as science for 48 years. Go ahead and look it up. Mercer has generated more apparent wealth in half that time. He's also the principal financier of the Heartland Institute, a think tank that promotes deregulation of all industries, which is precisely what allowed Madoff to thrive, leaving this reader to wonder who actually started Renaissance Technologies and what their politics were. Renaissance Technologies was founded in 1982 by James Simons, who retired in late 2009. Remember what happened then? Yeah, the stock market had just crashed. Simons was the number 5 donor in the 2016 election cycle. Mercer was number 1. But unlike Mercer, Simons is a Democrat. Before his retirement, Simons testified before Congress that he favored regulation. So naturally, when investors fled the equity markets in 2009, they escaped to the safety of Simons' hedge fund, just like they did with Bernie Madoff's hedge fund. Madoff was imprisoned on June 29, 2009, to serve a 150-year prison sentence. In addition, he was ordered to pay restitution of $170 billion to his victims, something pretty unlikely given his current circumstances. Mercer now appears equally vulnerable, especially in light of how average hedge funds perform. According to Business Insider, hedge funds averaged only 4% in 2015, leaving both investors and regulators to wonder not how Mercer is doing 35%, but if he's doing it. Alas, only time will tell. The secret to Goldberg's success is where he applied his many inventions. Ask anyone over 50, and they'll tell you how they recognize Rube Goldberg's name. He was a cartoonist who lambasted money trees in weekly comic strips. Goldberg's earnings didn't come close to those of Mercer or Madoff, but at least he got to keep it all.